You shameless woman. Right after I gave birth, my mother-in-law threw a tea-colored envelope at me. Visible from inside the envelope was a document titled DNA test results. Startled by the loud noise, my son began to cry. That baby isn't my son's child, is it? I've done my research. It's despicable to have an affair with some unknown man, bear his child, and then try to make my son raise it. You're the lowest of the low. Have some shame. That's impossible. I swear, I haven't been with any other man since I started dating Norman. Lies. Mom, please stop. My husband slowly approached and restrained his mother. Seeing his calm demeanor, I felt relieved. Yes, my husband believes in me. However, my hopes were shattered by the words he uttered shortly after. My name is Tammy. I have been married to Norman for 2 years. We both work and live together, enjoying our days to a certain extent. However, there was one person who cast a shadow over our life. It's his mother. She adored Norman to an abnormal extent and, although she never said it out loud, it seemed she disapproved of our marriage. On Norman's days off, she would invariably come over, saying, "I'll cook for you," and start rummaging through the fridge. If she only used what was available, I could have relaxed a bit, but if she couldn't find the ingredients or spices she wanted for the elaborate dishes she planned to make, she would send me out to buy them. Moreover, because she tries to make strange and elaborate dishes, it is quite difficult to find the right seasonings. Goose oil, nuoc mam, harissa. I had never even heard of them, and they were often not available at the local supermarket. When I returned home unable to find the ingredients, it seemed she had anticipated this and had already finished cooking another dish. Stir-fried vegetables, meat and potatoes, hamburgers, typical home cooking. Ultimately, she just wanted to spend time alone with her son. I had asked Norman several times to do something about his mother, but it seems difficult for him due to his personality. Norman is kind and easygoing, which can be seen positively, but negatively, he is easily swayed and finds it hard to assert himself. And his ambiguous attitude only seemed to encourage her overindulgence. But recently, something happened that made me care less about her. I found out I was pregnant. Having wanted a child for a long time, I was overjoyed. I also had a faint hope that once the baby was born, her affection would be divided, and her attitude might change. I had such faint hopes. A few days after I found out I was pregnant, Norman and I decided to go to tell her about the pregnancy. We knew that she would be coming to our house in the near future, but we felt that it would make sense for us to go to her to tell her of such an important event as her pregnancy, and so we did. When I arrived at the house, she was standing at the door. I wonder how long she has been standing there waiting for me. She greeted Norman with a smile, glanced at me, and said, "Welcome," with a chuckle. Thinking that she was the same as ever, I replied, "Thank you," and stepped over the threshold of her house. My father-in-law had died before Norman and I met, and my stepmother lives alone. We were led into the living room for a little chit-chat when she mentioned that a neighbor's wife, with whom she was very close, was pregnant. It's amazing what medical care can do these days, and even though my belly isn't that big at first glance, they can already tell the sex of the baby. It's a boy. We thought this would be a good opportunity to hear what she had to say, so we changed our expression and got down to business. We changed our expressions and got down to business. When I reported my pregnancy, she said, "Congratulations." How could she not be happy that Norman, whom she loved very much, was going to have a child? With this in mind, I looked at her as she said, "I'm looking forward to it." If only I could have noticed that she was not smiling behind her eyes at that moment, all that trouble might not have happened. A few months later, I was able to give birth safely. It was a boy, and he was born healthy and without any problems, weighing close to the standard weight. I named him Zion. After the birth, I was hospitalized for several days. During that time, my mother-in-law and Norman came to visit me a lot. Norman looked at the child and repeatedly told me how cute he was, and said to me, "Thank you for giving birth." A few days after I left the hospital, I was still in a state of flux with life with my child. It was Norman's day off from work and, as usual, his mother came over. Since I was also on maternity leave, I stayed home. She did not look as excited as usual to see Norman that day. Then again, she did not seem to be looking forward to seeing Zion. She handed Norman an envelope. Norman looks at her to see what's going on. "Norman, don't be surprised. I have actually had a DNA test done." We were both speechless at the suddenness of it all. I felt bad doing this, but my woman's intuition told me that Tammy was hiding something from me. Then, just as I thought, Norman and Zion are not related by blood. She told me that she had secretly collected Zion's saliva when she visited him in the hospital. Then, when she visited our home, she collected a hair from a man's comb. As a result of an appraisal using those two, the data seemed to indicate that Norman and Zion were strangers. But that is not possible. I have never had a relationship with any man other than Norman since we got married. Therefore, it was physically impossible for Norman and Zion not to be related. I am sorry, Norman, but this is the truth. This woman had a child with another man. Hearing those words, I tried to refute them. That can't be true. I tried to argue with her. But she turns to me and says, "If you want proof, it's right here," she yelled at me. "How dare you? You flirted with some guy you don't even know, and now you're carrying a child, and you want Norman to raise it. You are the worst kind of person. You should be ashamed of yourself. I've been smelling something fishy about you for a long time. Now you've finally revealed yourself." Zion cried out, perhaps startled by her voice. As much as I wanted to argue with her, I couldn't leave the child alone. As I fuss over Zion, Norman calls out to me from behind. I had hoped that Norman would believe me. However, that would soon be shattered. I see. That child is not my child. I was thinking that I would make a fresh start from now on and work harder and more sincerely than ever before, both at work and at home. Was that meaningless? No, it wasn't. That's not true. The appraisal results are wrong. Nothing I said seemed to reach Norman. He didn't even respond to my words. Poor Norman. Let's get a divorce and at least get a big alimony payout. Come over to my house today. I'll comfort you all night long. His mother hugged Norman's shoulder happily. Norman remained depressed. And they left the house. A few hours later, Zion also went to bed and reflected on what had happened today. In front of me was a copy of the DNA test results, which my mother-in-law had left behind. It was strange, after all. There is something behind the test results. First, I had to prove once again that Norman and Zion were related, so that I could talk to him again. With this in mind, I decided to submit Zion's saliva and his toothbrush for DNA analysis. A few days later, I received the results of the DNA test. The results showed that there was a 99% probability that Norman and Zion were related. I knew that my mother-in-law had somehow tampered with the results. In this way, she tried to break us up and get Norman back to herself. In an attempt to uncover the seed, I compared the new results with the appraisal results my mother-in-law had brought to me. There were some items that I did not know what they meant, so I checked them one by one while researching on the internet. Then I began to understand some things. One was that what she submitted as Zion's saliva belonged to someone else. The other was that the item submitted as Norman's hair also belonged to someone else. If they wanted to falsify that there was no blood relationship, they should have simply switched the DNA of either Norman or Zion. Why did she switch the DNA of both of them? One day, Norman, myself, and my mother-in-law were gathered at our house to discuss the divorce. I wonder if you have finally decided to get a divorce. I can't stop laughing when I think of the alimony you're going to have to pay. She looks very happy as she laughs. It's only now that you can laugh. I will return the humiliation I have suffered 100-fold. I first prepared the new DNA test results in front of the two of them. Before we talk about the divorce, you'll have to listen to my side of the story as well. I don't think it would be fair to only hear your side of the story. She was a little perturbed by the envelope that appeared in front of her and my calm demeanor. According to the results, Norman and Zion's blood is connected after all. This DNA test result is the proof. Without even looking at the results, my mother-in-law began to argue. If it was a DNA test, I would have done it already. I know, you faked it. Norman, don't believe what she says. You should divorce this liar as soon as possible. You need to sign the divorce papers now. You are the one who faked it. And don't worry, I'll give you a divorce. Norman, who had been watching the exchange between my mother-in-law and me, looked surprised at that line. I guess he did not expect that I would readily and, on the contrary, coercively declare the fulfillment of the agreement. After all, if you're getting a divorce, what's the point of the appraisals? You're not going to ask for child support, are you? What the heck do you think you're doing, having committed adultery? At this point, I looked at her and was amazed at her assumptions. In this person's mind, the lie I had told myself had somehow been transformed into the truth. But that illusion ends today. Of course. I will charge you child support. It is Norman, not me, who is having an affair. My mother-in-law stiffened, her mouth hanging open at the unexpected words. Norman's eyes widened as he looked at me. Hey, the saliva you submitted as Zion's belongs to a neighbor's child born around the same time. Oh, please don't make excuses or argue with me. I have already done the research, and if you insist, I can have the child's DNA tested and presented as evidence. She seemed to have lost her train of thought as she went back to the subject of the DNA test. You took a hair from Norman's comb and presented it. Of all the things you told you, this one must have been true. But do you know whose hair that was? Norman's face turned pale as he looked at her. The hair belonged to the man whom Norman had been having an affair with. The mother-in-law is unable to swallow what is happening, while Norman understands everything and hangs his head. As much as I want to denounce Norman, I have to confront my mother-in-law with reality first. The results of the DNA test that you brought to me were suspicious, so I asked a detective to look into Norman. Then we got a lot of pictures of Norman coming out of the hotel with a guy. With that, he spread the photos of the evidence all over the desk. She looked at the photos as if she were devouring them. Oh no, Norman, you can't be with a man. That's a lie. It's a composite. It's not going to happen even if this old hag tries to trick Norman. I know Norman is a normal and decent boy. I know him better than anyone else. Norman would never do such a crazy thing to another of the same sex. Just as I was about to confront my screaming mother-in-law with the next piece of evidence, Norman opened his mouth. You call me crazy. If anyone is crazy, it's you. You're always treating me like a child. What Tammy says is true. I had an affair with a man. The hair you submitted for DNA testing was probably from when I brought him home during Tammy's checkup. She seems confused when she hears those words. What are you talking about? I get it, now you're making fun of me, aren't you? But this isn't the time for that, is it? Besides, even if you are joking, it's too harsh. It's just too creepy to be between two guys. The next thing I knew, I saw Norman's anger show for the first time. Disgusting. If I'm sick, then you're sick too. Do you want me to tell you why I'm gay? You always treated me like an overprotective child and loved me. But I hated it. I couldn't stand it. When I was a student, I met someone who saw me as a man and an adult. And I fell in love with him. In other words, I became what my mother calls an anomaly, and it's all because of the way you raised me. I guess Norman had never rebelled before. The incident was too much for her to bear, and she sat up heaving. Then Norman turned to me and sat bolt upright on the floor. I'm sorry I took your word for it and suspected you of cheating on me, but the truth is that I really care about Zion. When our child was born, I was truly happy from the bottom of my heart. I also changed my mind at that time. You may think I'm weird like this, but I didn't have an affair with a woman. So, please give me another chance. With that, he bowed his head and got down on his knees. Norman is wrong. It is not that he trusted his mother or that the affair was not with a woman. Don't get me wrong. I honestly don't see anything wrong with trusting your mother or homosexuality itself. It is not easy to doubt one's parents, and love is a matter between two people, whether they are of the same or opposite sex, and it is not up to others to decide. There is nothing normal or abnormal about it. I also sympathize with the fact that you were hurt by your prejudiced mother, but that's not the same thing. But this is different. What I am angry about is that you betrayed me. That you cheated on me when I was going through a difficult time with my children. And that I was at home, with a stranger's bodily fluids smeared on our bed. I was shocked by them and could not forgive them. Besides, I hired a detective to look into it after the day my mother-in-law brought me the results of the DNA test. In other words, you were having fun with a man while you were separated. I'm so sorry. I was afraid that you would become more and more focused on the child and stop looking at me. Then an old boyfriend asked me out, and I couldn't say no. I'm so sorry. No. I will never forgive you. I will charge you alimony and child support, and I will also charge your mother-in-law for damages for falsifying the DNA test. Please don't forget that. I told them so and kicked them out. Later in the day, as I had declared, I requested alimony from Norman, my mother-in-law, and his boyfriend through my lawyer. I also demanded child support from Norman and damages from my mother-in-law, all of which were approved by the family court. My mother-in-law, who had been prejudiced against homosexuality since then, thought that Norman would change his mind, but instead he insisted that she correct her sexual orientation, and she insisted on insisting that he do so. He was surprisingly serious about me and Zion, and he asked me to give him a second chance, even if it meant paying alimony and child support in full, but I was completely out of love with him and would never accept his offer. At first I was worried about whether I would be able to raise the child single-handedly, but with the support of the local government and the cooperation of his parents, Zion is growing up well and quickly. I can't say that there is no possibility that I will end up like my mother-in-law if I make a mistake in the future. But a child is neither a possession nor a lapdog. I deeply engraved in my mind that I would not confuse loving with being attached.